Imagine standing at the altar, looking into the eyes of the person you love most in the world. Everything seems perfect. The vows are heartfelt, the setting magical, and your hearts are full of hope for a shared future. But just beneath the surface, something stirs a shadow from the past that threatens to unravel it all. This is a story about love's resilience, the weight of truth, and the courage it takes to forge a path forward when the past says no. Welcome to our journey of reflection and hope, where we delve into a tale of two people, Nia and Greg, whose love is tested by secrets they never saw coming. If this story resonates with you. Nia adjusted her veil one last time, the delicate lace brushing her shoulders as she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her smile was radiant, her heart full. This day, her wedding day, was the culmination of years of dreaming and planning. She had met Greg by chance, or perhaps by destiny, at a charity gala 2 years prior. He was charming and attentive, a man whose laughter warmed the room and whose presence made her feel seen. Their love story unfolded like a timeless romance. Late-night conversations turned into long walks under starlit skies. They supported each other's dreams, Greg with his ambitious plans for a nonprofit, and Nia with her career as a children's author. Their worlds blended seamlessly, and their love felt unshakable. Today, as she walked down the aisle, Nia believed with all her heart that she was stepping into a fairy tale come to life. The ceremony was idyllic. The venue, a sprawling garden adorned with cascading flowers, seemed to have been plucked from a dream. The sound of violins played softly in the background as the sun painted the sky in hues of gold and lavender. Greg stood waiting, his eyes filled with emotion. When Nia reached him, he took her hands in his touch both tender and steady. As the officiant began to speak, Nia could feel the weight of the moment. She looked into Greg's eyes and saw her future one filled with laughter, shared victories, and unwavering support. Yet, as the words "I do" escaped her lips, a strange unease crept into her mind, like the faint whisper of a storm on the horizon. This feeling wasn't rooted in doubt about Greg. No, she trusted him implicitly, but there was something about the atmosphere, a subtle tension she couldn't quite place. It wasn't the usual wedding jitters. It was a sensation as though the universe were holding its breath. The guests' applause broke the momentary spell, and the couple sealed their vows with a kiss that drew cheers and smiles from all around. Nia's heart swelled with love as Greg whispered in her ear, "You've made me the happiest man alive." As they made their way down the aisle as husband and wife, Nia glanced at Greg's family. While most of them were smiling warmly, there were a few who exchanged glances that felt off. It was subtle, a momentary look here, a hushed whisper there. She brushed the thoughts aside, attributing it to the emotions of the day. The reception was a continuation of the dream. Guests danced under a canopy of twinkling lights. Glasses clinked in celebration, and heartfelt toasts brought laughter and tears. Nia found herself surrounded by love and support, but the undercurrent of unease persisted. Perhaps it was the way Greg's uncle, a stoic man with sharp features, seemed to avoid eye contact with her, or the brief, almost imperceptible hesitation when Greg's grandmother hugged her and whispered, "Welcome to the family." Nia didn't want to dwell on these moments. After all, weddings were emotionally charged events, and people processed them differently. She was determined to focus on the joy of the day, the love she and Greg shared, the bright future they were building. But the whispers wouldn't leave her alone. Later that evening, as she sat beside Greg, watching the guests enjoy themselves, she turned to him and asked, "Is everything okay with your family? They seem a bit reserved." Greg chuckled softly, brushing off her concerns. "They're just getting used to the idea of having such a vibrant, wonderful woman like you around. Give them time." His reassurance comforted her, but only momentarily. As the night wore on, the whispers became harder to ignore. Nia's mother, a perceptive woman who rarely missed a detail, leaned in at one point and said quietly, "Keep your eyes open, my dear. Sometimes love can make us see what we want to see and miss what we need to." Those words lingered as the evening drew to a close. Nia and Greg shared a slow dance, their faces close, their movements perfectly in sync. Yet, even in Greg's arms, she felt that whisper again, that faint sense of something unresolved. As the guests departed and the newlyweds prepared to leave for their honeymoon suite, Nia looked back at the venue one last time. It was beautiful, the kind of day most people dream of. But deep inside, she knew that the story they were beginning wasn't going to be as simple as she had hoped. And so, with love in her heart and questions in her mind, Nia stepped into her new life with Greg, unaware of the challenges that lay ahead. What secrets lingered behind Greg's family's reserved smiles? Nia couldn't have known that their fairy tale wedding was just the prologue to a much more complex tale, a story of love, truth, and the courage to confront the shadows of the past. In the next chapter, we'll explore the signs that began to surface during the celebrations, unraveling the hidden truths that would test the strength of their bond. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss what happens next. The night after the wedding was one of celebration, but for Nia, the subtle unease lingered in her thoughts like a quiet hum she couldn't silence. It wasn't loud enough to drown out her joy, but persistent enough to keep her alert. As she and Greg retired to their suite, she tried to brush it aside. After all, today was about love, happiness, and the beginning of their new life together. Yet, as she lay beside Greg that night, his steady breathing signaling he'd drifted into peaceful slumber, Nia couldn't help but replay moments from the day. Greg's family had always been polite to her, even welcoming in their reserved way. But there was something unspoken in their demeanor, like they were holding back. She thought about his uncle's avoidance, his grandmother's hesitant warmth, and those fleeting glances exchanged between relatives during the ceremony. They hadn't seemed overtly disapproving, but the tension was there, subtle and undeniable. The morning after, as the newlyweds enjoyed breakfast in their suite overlooking the ocean, Nia decided to probe gently. "Greg, your family seemed a bit distant yesterday. Is there something I should know?" Her tone was light, but her eyes searched his face for any sign of discomfort. Greg looked up from his coffee with a small smile. "You're overthinking it, love. They're just not used to big celebrations. My family tends to keep things low-key. Give them time. They'll warm up." His explanation made sense, but something in his delivery felt rehearsed, like he'd been preparing for this moment. Nia nodded, choosing not to press further. After all, they were just starting their life as husband and wife, and she didn't want to cast a shadow over their honeymoon. As they strolled along the beach later that day, hand in hand, the sunlight danced on the waves, and Greg's laughter rang out, light and carefree. It was moments like these that reminded Nia why she had fallen in love with him. His optimism and warmth were infectious, and she wanted to believe his words wholeheartedly. Yet, in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Over the next few days, they settled into their honeymoon routine, exploring the quaint coastal town, savoring its culinary delights, and reveling in the intimacy of their shared solitude. Still, the whispers from Greg's family crept into her thoughts at the quietest moments. It was during an afternoon stroll through the town's cobblestone streets that a small encounter reignited Nia's suspicions. As they passed a cafe, an elderly couple sitting by the window caught sight of Greg and exchanged a peculiar glance. The woman leaned in to whisper something to her companion, who shook his head with a grave expression. Nia noticed Greg's jaw tighten ever so slightly, but he quickly masked it with a bright smile as he led her away. "Did you know them?" she asked casually, trying to gauge his reaction. Greg hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying, "No, probably just locals curious about the new visitors in town. Small towns are like that." It was a plausible explanation, but Nia's intuition told her otherwise. The interaction had been too deliberate, too laden with unspoken meaning. She decided to let it go for the moment, filing it away with the other strange occurrences. As their honeymoon came to an end, Nia felt a mix of emotions: excitement about starting their life together, and an undercurrent of apprehension about returning home, where the enigmatic aura of Greg's family awaited. Their welcome back was warm, but not without its peculiarities. Greg's parents hosted a small dinner in their honor, inviting a handful of close relatives. The evening was pleasant enough on the surface, filled with polite conversation and toasts to the couple's happiness. Yet, As Nia observed the interactions around the table, she couldn't ignore the undercurrents of tension. At one point, Greg's father, a man of few words, made a toast that struck a chord. To Greg and Nia, may your love be strong enough to weather all storms, no matter where they come from. The words seemed innocuous, even supportive, but the way his father's eyes lingered on Greg as he spoke gave them weight. Nia glanced at her husband, who met his father's gaze with a faint nod, his expression unreadable. Later that evening, as they said their goodbyes, Greg's grandmother pulled Nia aside. Her frail hands gripped Nia's firmly as she said, "You're a lovely girl, Nia, truly. But sometimes love requires more than what the heart alone can give." Nia forced a smile, thanking her for the kind words, but her heart raced. The cryptic remark left her with more questions than answers. What was she trying to convey? And why did it feel like everyone in Greg's family was dancing around an invisible truth? In the days that followed, Nia couldn't help but feel like she was walking on a tightrope, trying to balance her love for Greg with the growing unease about his family. She decided to talk to her mother, seeking the wisdom she had always provided. Over tea, Nia recounted her observations, careful not to let her emotions cloud the narrative. Her mother listened intently, her brow furrowed in thought. "Sometimes, my dear, people carry burdens they aren't ready to share," her mother said gently. "But secrets have a way of surfacing, whether we're prepared for them or not. Trust your instincts, but don't let them overshadow the good you've found in Greg. Give him a chance to open up, but be ready for what you might hear." Her mother's advice was both comforting and unsettling. Nia resolved to approach Greg when the time felt right, but as the days turned into weeks, the right moment seemed elusive. It wasn't until a chance encounter with one of Greg's cousins at a community event that the pieces began to fall into place. The young man, clearly unaware of the discretion the rest of the family had maintained, made a casual comment about the old family controversies. When Nia pressed him for details, he grew visibly nervous, stammering something about it being ancient history and quickly changing the subject. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been firmly planted. That evening, as Nia sat alone in their living room, her mind raced with possibilities. She loved Greg deeply, but she couldn't ignore the growing shadow of the unknown. What was his family hiding? And why did it feel like everyone was complicit in keeping it from her? The whispers had become impossible to ignore, and Nia was determined to uncover the truth. What was the ancient history that Greg's family was so reluctant to discuss? And why did it seem to cast a shadow over their future? In the next chapter, the truth will come to light, and it will challenge everything Nia thought she knew about the man she had vowed to love forever. Stay with us as we dive deeper into this unfolding tale. The truth, when it comes, often arrives in the most unassuming of moments. For Nia, it came during what should have been a carefree afternoon, a quiet family gathering hosted by Greg's aunt, a woman known for her meticulous hospitality and sharp wit. The gathering was small, just immediate family and a few close friends, with an air of casual intimacy that initially put Nia at ease. As she moved through the warmly lit living room, sipping tea and engaging in polite conversation, Nia overheard a fragment of dialogue that made her pause. Two of Greg's older cousins stood near the fireplace, speaking in hushed tones, their expressions tense. "It's just, after everything, you'd think Greg would have told her," one of them said, her voice low but firm. "He probably thought it didn't matter," the other replied. "It's ancient history. Why stir the pot?" Nia's heart skipped a beat. The words were vague, but the weight behind them was undeniable. She tried to dismiss it as idle gossip, but the unease that had shadowed her since the wedding surged back with full force. Later that evening, as the guests settled into conversation around the dining table, Greg's uncle brought up a topic that made Nia's breath catch. "So Greg," he began, his tone light but probing, "have you thought about how to handle the legacy of the Terzo name? It's a big responsibility, you know." Greg stiffened ever so slightly, his fork pausing midway to his mouth. "We're focused on building a future, Uncle. The past doesn't define us." The exchange was brief, but it left Nia reeling. She had never heard the name Terzo in relation to Greg before. Curious, she leaned closer to him as the conversation shifted to another topic. "Who's Terzo?" she asked softly, keeping her tone casual. Greg's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite decipher: hesitation, perhaps, or even fear. "It's just an old family name," he said with a dismissive wave. "Nothing important." But Nia knew better. Greg's family was composed, deliberate, and rarely mentioned anything by accident. If they were referencing a name with such significance, it had to mean something. Unable to shake her curiosity, Nia decided to investigate. Over the next few days, she began piecing together fragments of conversations and subtle hints from Greg's relatives. But it wasn't until she stumbled upon an old photo album in the family's library that the pieces began to fit. The album was tucked away on a high shelf, dusty and worn, as though it hadn't been touched in years. Flipping through its pages, Nia found photos of Greg's grandparents, a proud and dignified couple. Among the pictures was a newspaper clipping that stopped her cold. The headline read, "Macaulay Terzo, a divisive figure in the fight for racial integration." Beneath it was a photo of an older man, Greg's grandfather, unmistakably standing at a podium with a defiant expression. The accompanying article detailed how Macaulay Terzo, a prominent businessman in the 1960s, had been a vocal opponent of racial integration in their town. His speeches, laced with veiled prejudice, had stirred controversy and resentment among many. Though the article mentioned that he later expressed regret for some of his actions, the damage had been done. Nia felt the weight of betrayal settle over her like a heavy cloak. She had trusted Greg implicitly, believing him to be open and honest. Yet he had kept this part of his family's history hidden from her. The man she had married, the man she had vowed to share her life with, had chosen not to tell her about something that could have shaped her decision to say, "I do." That evening, unable to contain her emotions any longer, Nia confronted Greg. They were in their living room, the dim light casting long shadows as she held up the newspaper clipping. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Greg's face fell as he took the clipping from her hands, his expression a mix of guilt and weariness. "I didn't think it mattered," he said quietly. "It's the past, Nia. It has nothing to do with us." "Nothing to do with us?" she repeated, her voice rising. "Greg, this is your family's history. This is the legacy you carry, whether you acknowledge it or not. How could you not think I deserved to know?" Greg ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "I was ashamed, okay? My grandfather's actions don't reflect who I am or what I believe. I didn't want them to overshadow what we have." Nia's anger softened slightly at his admission, but the hurt remained. "Greg, I understand that you're not your grandfather, but this isn't just about you. It's about trust. You kept this from me, and now I'm questioning what else you might be hiding." Greg reached for her hands, his eyes pleading. "Nia, I love you. I didn't tell you because I didn't want it to come between us. Please believe me when I say that I'm nothing like him." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the revelation hanging between them. Nia wanted to believe Greg, to trust that his love for her was genuine and untainted by his family's past. But the seeds of doubt had been sown, and they would not be easily uprooted. That night, as Nia lay awake, her mind raced with questions. Could their love withstand the burden of such a legacy? Was it fair to hold Greg accountable for the actions of his ancestors? And most importantly, could she truly move forward without knowing the full truth? The revelation of Greg's family history has left Nia reeling, but it's only the beginning. How will she navigate the delicate balance between love and betrayal? And can Greg find a way to prove that his love for her is stronger than the shadows of his past? In the next chapter, emotions run high as Nia and Greg confront the truths that could make or break their relationship. Stay tuned for this heart-wrenching turn in their journey. The weight of betrayal bore heavily on Nia's heart as she sat at the edge of their bed, clutching the newspaper clipping. The words swirled in her mind, unrelenting, as if they were etched into her thoughts. Macaulay Terzo, a divisive figure in the fight for racial integration. She had read and reread the article so many times that the paper had started to crinkle under her grip. Greg stood a few feet away, his arms crossed defensively, but his expression pleading. The space between them, though small, felt like a chasm. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Greg spoke, his voice low and strained. "Nia, please, just talk to me. I can't fix this if you won't tell me what you're feeling." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears that she fought to hold back. "How can I even begin to explain what I'm feeling? Greg, you lied to me. No, you omitted something so monumental, something that could have changed everything." Greg flinched at her words, taking a tentative step closer. "It wasn't a lie, Nia. I didn't tell you because I didn't think it mattered. My grandfather's actions have nothing to do with who I am, with who we are. But it does matter." Nia snapped, standing abruptly. "It matters because you made that decision for me. You decided that I didn't need to know, that I wouldn't care. Greg, this isn't just some insignificant detail. It's your family's legacy. And whether you want it to or not, it does affect us." Her words hung in the air, each one a sharp edge cutting deeper into Greg's defenses. He lowered his gaze, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I was ashamed, Nia. Do you think it was easy for me to learn about this? To accept that someone in my family could have been so hateful? I've spent my entire life trying to distance myself from that man, from everything he stood for. And I understand that," Nia said, her tone softening slightly. "But Greg, don't you see? By hiding this from me, you've made it harder for me to trust you. I need to know that we can face things like this together, not that you'll decide what's too painful for me to handle." Greg reached for her hands, his touch tentative but firm. "You're right," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I should have told you. I should have trusted you enough to share this with you before we got married. But please, Nia, don't let this destroy what we have. I love you more than anything, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Nia searched his eyes, looking for the sincerity she needed to see, and it was there, raw and unfiltered. But the hurt in her heart wasn't so easily erased. "Greg, I love you too. But love isn't enough without trust. We can't build a future together if there are cracks in the foundation." Greg nodded slowly, his jaw tightening with resolve. "Then I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild that trust. Just don't give up on us, Nia." The conversation left them both emotionally drained, but it was far from the end. Over the next few days, the tension between them was palpable, their interactions careful and measured. Nia felt like she was walking a tightrope, torn between her love for Greg and the nagging doubt that his family's past could cast a shadow over their future. It wasn't until Greg's parents invited them to dinner that the situation came to a head. The invitation had been extended as a gesture of goodwill, a chance to reconnect and smooth over any lingering awkwardness. But for Nia, it was an opportunity to seek answers. As they sat around the polished dining table, the air thick with unspoken tension, Nia decided to address the elephant in the room. "I came across something interesting recently," she began, her tone calm but pointed. "An article about Macaulay Terzo and his controversial history." The room fell silent. Greg's mother froze mid-reach for her glass, her expression one of thinly veiled panic. His father, ever composed, set down his fork with deliberate slowness. Greg's uncle was the first to speak, his tone dismissive. "That's old news, Nia. It has no bearing on anything today." Nia met his gaze steadily. "Maybe not for you, but it does for me. I think it's important to understand the legacy I'm marrying into, especially when it involves something as significant as this." Greg's father cleared his throat, his voice calm but firm. "Macaulay made mistakes, grave ones, but he was a product of his time. People change, and he did his best to atone for those mistakes later in life. We don't let his past define us, and neither should you." "I appreciate that perspective," Nia said carefully. "But don't you think it's fair for me to have known this before committing my life to Greg? Transparency is part of trust." Greg's mother finally spoke, her voice tinged with guilt. "We should have told you. You deserve to know everything about the family you've joined. But please understand, Nia, it wasn't about keeping secrets. It was about not wanting to taint the love you and Greg share with something so ugly." Nia nodded, appreciating her honesty but still feeling the weight of the omission. She turned to Greg, her expression softening. I don't blame you for your grandfather's actions, but I need you to promise me, Greg, that from now on, we'll face everything together. No more hiding. No more deciding for me what I can or can't handle. Greg took her hand in his grip firm and reassuring. I promise, Nia, no more secrets. As they left his parents' house that evening, Nia felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be challenging, but perhaps, with honesty and effort, they could navigate it together. The confrontation has opened the door to healing, but can Nia and Greg truly move forward with the shadows of the past lingering in the background? In the next chapter, they will face the fragility of trust and grapple with the question of whether love can truly overcome the weight of legacy. Don't miss the next emotional turn in this journey of love and redemption. In the days following the confrontation at Greg's parents' house, Nia found herself caught in an emotional whirlwind. She had thought that voicing her concerns and hearing Greg's promises would bring some measure of clarity, but instead, it left her grappling with more questions. Could love truly survive when trust had been so deeply fractured? And could she ever fully separate Greg from the legacy of his family's past? At first, Greg made every effort to reassure her. He was attentive and thoughtful, going out of his way to demonstrate his commitment to transparency. He shared childhood memories, stories of his struggles to distance himself from his grandfather's shadow, and even moments of shame he had never dared to speak of before. I remember being a teenager and hearing whispers about grandfather at family gatherings. Greg confessed one evening as they sat together on the couch. I didn't understand it at first, but when I asked my dad, he told me everything. It was like a punch to the gut, knowing that someone I'd admired had been capable of such hate. Nia listened intently, her heart aching for the boy Greg had been. She could see how much it had hurt him, how hard he had worked to forge his own identity. Yet, the pain of his omission still lingered. I appreciate you telling me this now, she said softly. But Greg, you had years to come to terms with this. I've had days. It's not something I can process overnight. Greg nodded, his expression heavy with understanding. I know. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever it takes, we'll get through this together. But as much as Nia wanted to believe him, doubt continued to creep in. Insidious and relentless. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the future they were trying to build. How could she be sure that other truths wouldn't come to light later? Truths that Greg might decide she didn't need to know. Her uncertainty bled into their daily interactions. Simple conversations became laced with tension, and moments that once felt natural now carried an undercurrent of unease. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Nia asked, "What else haven't you told me, Greg? Is there anything else I should know?" Greg froze, the knife in his hand stilling over the cutting board. "Nia, I've told you everything," he said carefully. "I swear, there's nothing else. But how can I be sure?" She pressed, her voice trembling. "How can I trust that you won't keep something from me again because you think it's for my own good?" Greg set the knife down and turned to face her, his expression pained. "I don't know how to convince you. Nia, I can't undo the mistakes I've made, but I'm trying to do better. What more can I do?" The desperation in his voice tugged at her heart, but it wasn't enough to quell her fears. She loved Greg deeply, but love alone couldn't erase the cracks in their foundation. Their struggles didn't go unnoticed by those around them. Nia's mother, ever the voice of wisdom, offered gentle guidance. "Trust is like a vase, my dear," she said during one of their phone calls. "Once it's cracked, you can repair it, but it will never be the same. The question is, can you find beauty in its imperfections?" The analogy resonated with Nia, but it also highlighted the gravity of their situation. Repairing their bond would require time, patience, and a willingness to embrace the imperfections of their relationship. Greg, for his part, took proactive steps to address the underlying issues. He suggested couples counseling, hoping that a neutral perspective might help them navigate their challenges. At first, Nia was hesitant, unsure if airing their struggles to a stranger would be helpful. But eventually she agreed, recognizing that they needed more than love to move forward. They needed tools to rebuild their trust. In their first session, the therapist encouraged them to share their fears and frustrations openly. Greg spoke of his guilt and shame, of his fear that his family's past would tarnish the life he and Nia were trying to build. Nia, in turn, shared her feelings of betrayal and her struggle to reconcile the man she loved with the secrets he had kept. It's clear that both of you are deeply committed to this relationship, the therapist said after listening to their accounts. But commitment alone isn't enough. You need to create a foundation of honesty and vulnerability. That means facing the uncomfortable truths head-on, together, rather than avoiding them out of fear. The sessions were challenging, forcing them to confront their pain and fears in ways they hadn't before. But slowly, they began to find common ground. Greg learned to open up without hesitation, while Nia worked on letting go of her need for certainty. Still, progress was slow, and setbacks were inevitable. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, Nia found herself questioning whether their efforts were worth it. As she sat alone in their bedroom, staring at the wedding photo on her nightstand, she wondered if love was enough to overcome the weight of the past. Her thoughts were interrupted when Greg entered the room, his expression weary but determined. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Nia," he said quietly, "I know this isn't easy. I know I've hurt you, but I believe in us. I believe we can get through this if we're willing to fight for it." Tears welled in Nia's eyes as she looked at him. "I want to believe that too, Greg, but it's hard. It's so hard." Greg nodded, his grip on her hand tightening. "I know, but hard doesn't mean impossible. We've come this far, and I'm not ready to give up on us. Are you?" Nia hesitated, her heart torn between fear and hope. Finally, she shook her head. "No, I'm not ready to give up either." Their journey was far from over, but in that moment, they made a silent pact to keep fighting for their love, for their future, and for the trust they were working so hard to rebuild. The fragility of trust has tested their bond, but Nia and Greg are determined to persevere. As they navigate the shadows of the past, they must confront the deeper question: can love truly transform pain into strength? In the next chapter, we'll see how their efforts to heal lead to a turning point that could redefine their relationship forever. Stay with us as this poignant story continues. The journey toward reconciliation was anything but straightforward for Nia and Greg. Each step forward seemed to be met with reminders of the past, casting long shadows over their attempts to rebuild trust. While their counseling sessions provided a framework for communication, the emotional weight of their situation remained a constant undercurrent in their daily lives. Greg, ever determined to make amends, immersed himself in efforts to bridge the gap between them. He made it a point to share stories from his childhood, including those tinged with memories of his grandfather. It was his way of reclaiming his family's history, not as a reflection of who he was, but as a context for the man he had become. "I used to think the world of grandfather when I was a kid," Greg admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, the fading light casting a golden glow over their faces. "He had this commanding presence, you know. But as I grew older, I started to see the cracks in the image. It was hard to reconcile the man I admired with the things I learned about him later." Nia listened quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She appreciated Greg's openness, but it didn't erase the lingering questions in her mind. Could she truly build a future with someone whose family carried such a painful legacy? And more importantly, could Greg fully understand the depth of her concerns? Her own reflections brought her back to a question that had haunted her since the beginning. What would their future look like? If they had children someday, how would they navigate the complexities of explaining their family's history? The thought filled her with both dread and determination. She knew she couldn't change the past, but she could choose how it shaped their future. The strain wasn't just internal, it began to seep into their interactions with others. Greg's family, though polite, seemed to tread carefully around Nia, as if afraid to say the wrong thing. Social gatherings became fraught with unspoken tension, every glance and gesture loaded with subtext. At one such gathering, Greg's grandmother approached Nia with a tentative smile. "You're a strong woman." "Nia," she said, her voice wavering, "I see how much you love Greg, and I hope you know that love is the best foundation you can have. The past, it doesn't have to define you." Nia appreciated the sentiment, but it felt too simplistic. The past might not define them, but it couldn't be ignored either. She smiled politely, choosing not to engage further. It wasn't just Greg's family that posed challenges. Nia's own friends and relatives, once unwavering in their support of her marriage, began expressing subtle doubts. During a lunch with her closest friend Rachel, the topic came up unexpectedly. "I'm just saying," Rachel began hesitantly. "It's a lot to carry, Nia. His family's history. The baggage, it's not something you can just brush aside. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Nia bristled at the question, though she couldn't deny its validity. "It's not about being ready," she replied carefully. "It's about deciding if it's worth fighting for. And I think it is." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I hope you're right. Just don't lose yourself in the process, okay?" Those words stayed with Nia, a reminder of the fine line she was walking. She loved Greg deeply, but she also needed to ensure that their love didn't come at the expense of her own sense of self. As the weeks turned into months, the strain began to manifest in small but telling ways. Arguments that once resolved quickly now lingered, their edges sharper. Moments of joy were tinged with hesitation, as if both Nia and Greg were waiting for the other shoe to drop. One evening, during a rare, quiet moment, Greg broached a topic that had been on both their minds. "I've been thinking," he said cautiously, "maybe we should look into ways to address grandfather's legacy. Not just for us, but for anyone else it might have affected." Nia raised an eyebrow, intrigued but wary. "What do you mean?" "I don't know exactly," Greg admitted, "but maybe there's a way to turn something negative into something positive, like supporting initiatives that promote equality or starting a foundation in his name to help underserved communities." The idea was noble, but it also felt overwhelming. Nia admired Greg's intentions, but she couldn't help but wonder if it was a way for him to alleviate his guilt rather than genuinely confront the past. "It's a good idea," she said after a moment, "but it can't just be about fixing what's broken. It has to come from a place of genuine understanding and growth." Greg nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. Let's think about it more together." Their conversation marked a turning point, albeit a small one. For the first time, Nia felt a glimmer of hope that they could find a way forward, not by erasing the past, but by learning from it. But hope alone wasn't enough. The shadow of Greg's family history continued to loom large, casting doubt on their ability to truly move past it. One day, as Nia sat alone in their living room, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. Love, she realized, was not a straight path. It was messy, complicated, and often fraught with challenges, but it was also resilient, capable of enduring even the heaviest burdens if nurtured with care. The question was whether she and Greg had the strength to carry those burdens together, or whether the weight of the past would ultimately tear them apart. The shadow of Greg's family's history continues to challenge their bond, but hope glimmers on the horizon. In the next chapter, Nia and Greg will face a pivotal moment that forces them to redefine what love, trust, and resilience truly mean. Stay with us as this story unfolds into an inspiring tale of transformation and redemption. It was on a quiet Sunday morning that Nia found herself sitting by the large bay window in their home, sipping her tea as sunlight spilled across the room. The world outside seemed calm, almost serene, in stark contrast to the turmoil she and Greg had been navigating for months. As she watched the leaves swaying gently in the breeze, a thought began to take shape, a realization she hadn't allowed herself to fully confront. Love, she realized, wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about unbroken trust or a history free of scars. It was about resilience, about the ability to grow together despite the imperfections that life inevitably brought. She had spent so much time focusing on what had gone wrong that she hadn't given herself space to appreciate what was right. Greg entered the room a few moments later, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He placed one in front of her with a small smile, his eyes searching hers for any sign of the tension that had so often clouded their mornings. "Penny, for your thoughts?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. Nia hesitated before answering, her fingers tracing the edge of her mug. "I've been thinking about us," she said finally, "about what it means to love someone, flaws and all." Greg's expression softened, and he leaned forward slightly. "And what have you figured out?" "That love isn't about ignoring the hard things," she replied. "It's about facing them together, even when it's uncomfortable. And I think I've been so caught up in the weight of everything that I forgot why I fell in love with you in the first place." Greg reached across the table to take her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "I've been thinking about that too," he admitted. "And I know I've made mistakes, big ones. But I want you to know that I'm willing to keep working every single day to be the partner you deserve." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Nia's eyes, and for the first time in what felt like ages, she allowed herself to truly believe him. Their love wasn't perfect, but perhaps it didn't need to be. In the days that followed, Nia and Greg began to approach their relationship with a renewed sense of purpose. They committed to open communication, sharing their fears, hopes, and dreams without hesitation. Nia found herself slowly letting go of the resentment she had been holding on to, allowing space for understanding and forgiveness to take root. Greg, in turn, began to see the value in vulnerability. He shared stories of his grandfather's later years, how Macaulay Terzo had tried to make amends for his past actions. "He wasn't a perfect man," Greg said one evening as they sat together on the porch, "but I think he wanted to be better. And I want to believe that counts for something." Nia nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "It does count," she agreed. "But it's up to us to decide what we want to carry forward and what we want to leave behind." This shift in perspective didn't happen overnight, nor did it erase the challenges they faced, but it gave them a foundation to build on, a shared understanding that their love was worth the effort it took to nurture it. Their journey toward healing also inspired them to think beyond themselves. One evening, Greg suggested an idea that had been forming in the back of his mind. "What if we started something together?" he said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "A way to give back, to turn all of this into something meaningful." Nia tilted her head, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Something like a community initiative," Greg explained. "A program that promotes understanding and bridges gaps, especially in places where people still feel the echoes of division." The idea resonated deeply with Nia. It felt like a way to transform their struggles into something positive, a way to honor the lessons they had learned and create a legacy they could be proud of. Over the next few weeks, they began laying the groundwork for their initiative. They reached out to local organizations, brainstormed ways to bring people together, and began crafting a mission statement that reflected their values. The process was both challenging and rewarding, giving them a sense of purpose that extended beyond their relationship. As they worked together, Nia began to see Greg in a new light. He wasn't just the man she had fallen in love with. He was a partner in every sense of the word, someone who shared her vision for a better future. And as they poured their energy into their shared goal, she felt their bond growing stronger, more resilient than ever before. One evening, as they reviewed plans for their first community event, Greg turned to Nia with a look of quiet gratitude. "You've taught me so much," he said softly, "about love, forgiveness, and what it means to truly be there for someone. I don't think I could have done any of this without you." Nia smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "We've taught each other," she replied, "and I think that's what love is supposed to be, a partnership, a journey of growth." As they sat together, the weight of the past seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. Their love wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was enough. Nia and Greg have begun to transform their pain into purpose, finding strength in their shared vision for a better future. But as they take on this new challenge, they must navigate the complexities of turning an idea into action. Can their love and newfound purpose withstand the pressures of this journey? In the next chapter, they'll face a decision that will redefine everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. Stay tuned for the next inspiring step in their story. The day Greg and Nia officially launched their community initiative dawned with a mix of excitement and trepidation. They had worked tirelessly to build a program that not only reflected their values, but also addressed the lingering divisions that echoed through their town. The initiative, aptly named Bridges for Tomorrow, aimed to foster understanding through dialogue, education, and community-driven projects. Their first event, A community forum held at a local cultural center drew a crowd far larger than they had anticipated. Rows of chairs filled quickly, with people of all ages and backgrounds eager to participate in what promised to be a meaningful discussion. Nia stood near the entrance, greeting attendees with a warm smile, while Greg busied himself adjusting microphones and ensuring the stage was set. As the room buzzed with anticipation, Nia felt a wave of pride and nervousness wash over her. This wasn't just a milestone for their initiative. It was a reflection of how far she and Greg had come as a couple. The tension that had once threatened to pull them apart had been channeled into something tangible, something that could make a difference. When Greg took the stage to deliver the opening remarks, Nia watched him with admiration. His words were heartfelt, his tone confident yet humble. He spoke about the importance of acknowledging the past while striving to build a better future, and how their personal journey had inspired them to create a space for healing and growth. As he finished, the audience erupted into applause, and Nia felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. This was the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had faced his own fears and insecurities to become a beacon of hope for others. The event unfolded smoothly, with panel discussions, breakout sessions, and moments of reflection that left attendees visibly moved. By the time the last guest departed, the room was filled with a palpable sense of possibility. But as Greg and Nia packed up, the weight of what lay ahead began to settle in. They knew that this was only the beginning, and the challenges they would face were far from over. Later that evening, as they sat together in their living room, Nia turned to Greg with a thoughtful expression. "Today felt like a step in the right direction," she said. "But I can't help wondering, are we ready for what this might demand of us?" Greg set his mug down, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I mean the time, the energy, the emotional investment," Nia explained. "This isn't just about us anymore, Greg. It's about the people who are counting on us to make a difference. What happens if we let them down?" Greg reached for her hand, his grip steady. "We're not going to let them down," he said firmly. "We've come this far because we believe in what we're doing. And as long as we stay true to that, I think we'll be okay." Nia nodded, though her concerns lingered. The initiative had given them a renewed sense of purpose, but it had also introduced new complexities into their lives. Balancing their personal relationship with the demands of a growing project wasn't going to be easy. Over the next few months, the pressures of their work began to test them in unexpected ways. Late nights spent planning events and managing logistics left little time for the quiet moments they once cherished. Disagreements over priorities occasionally flared, and the weight of responsibility sometimes felt overwhelming. One evening, after a particularly heated argument about the direction of the initiative, Nia found herself questioning whether they had taken on more than they could handle. She sat alone in their bedroom, staring at the vision board they had created together, a collage of words and images that represented their goals. Greg entered a few minutes later, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry," he said softly, sitting beside her. "I didn't mean to snap at you. I want this to work so badly, and sometimes I let my frustration get the better of me." Nia sighed, leaning into him. "I know, and I want this to work too. But Greg, we can't let this project come between us. If we're not strong as a team, how can we expect to make a difference for anyone else?" Greg nodded, wrapping an arm around her. "You're right. We need to make time for us no matter how busy things get. I don't want to lose sight of why we started this in the first place." Their conversation marked a turning point. They began setting boundaries, carving out dedicated time for their relationship and prioritizing self-care alongside their work. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it helped them find a semblance of balance. As Bridges for Tomorrow gained traction, they were faced with a pivotal decision: whether to expand their efforts beyond their town. The idea was both exciting and daunting, as it would require additional resources and a level of commitment they hadn't fully anticipated. During a late-night brainstorming session, Greg broached the topic. "What do you think, Nia? Should we go for it?" Nia hesitated, weighing the pros and cons. "I think it's an amazing opportunity," she said finally, "but we need to be sure that we're ready. This isn't just about scaling up, it's about staying true to our mission." If we lose sight of that, then what's the point? Greg nodded, his gaze steady. Then let's do it. But let's do it the right way together. Their decision to expand marked a new chapter in their journey, one filled with challenges, but also endless possibilities. As they stepped into this next phase, Nia and Greg found themselves drawing strength from each other in ways they never had before. Their love, tested and tempered by adversity, had become a force not only for their own growth, but for the betterment of those around them. And as they looked to the future, they knew that while the road ahead would be difficult, it was a path worth walking hand in hand. Greg and Mia have made a bold choice to expand their mission, stepping into uncharted territory with hope and determination. But as they take on new challenges, they must confront the question of whether their love can continue to sustain them through the pressures of an ever-growing vision. In the next chapter, their journey will lead to profound lessons about redemption, unity, and the true meaning of legacy. Stay tuned as this inspiring tale nears its transformative conclusion. As the scope of Bridges for Tomorrow expanded, Nia and Greg found themselves navigating an entirely new landscape. Their initiative, once a small local effort, had grown into a regional movement, with towns and cities across the state embracing their vision. While the success was exhilarating, it also brought with it an array of challenges: logistical, financial, and personal. For Nia, the experience was a profound test of her ability to balance purpose and passion. She poured herself into organizing events, connecting with communities, and ensuring that every project reflected their commitment to fostering understanding. Greg, meanwhile, took on the role of spokesperson, using his natural charisma to inspire others and secure partnerships. But with their success came scrutiny. Media outlets began digging into their backgrounds, and it wasn't long before Macaulay Turzo's controversial history resurfaced. Articles and opinion pieces dissected Greg's lineage, with some questioning whether the grandson of such a divisive figure had the moral authority to lead a movement for unity. The backlash was sharp and unrelenting, and Greg bore the brunt of it. He found himself at the center of a storm he had long tried to avoid, with critics casting doubt on his intentions and motives. The weight of the scrutiny took a toll, leaving him exhausted and disheartened. One evening, as they sat together after a particularly grueling day, Greg voiced his frustrations. "Sometimes I wonder if we're doing the right thing," he said, his voice heavy. "No matter how much good we try to do, it feels like people will always focus on the worst parts of the past." Nia reached for his hand, her grip firm and steady. "Greg, we knew this wouldn't be easy, but the fact that people are talking means we're making an impact. Change isn't supposed to be comfortable, it's supposed to challenge people." Her words resonated, but Greg couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy. What if they're right, Nia? What if I'm not the right person to lead this? What if my connection to grandfather does more harm than good? Nia looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "You're not your grandfather, Greg. And the fact that you're willing to confront his legacy head-on shows how much you've grown. This isn't about erasing the past, it's about creating a new one." Together, their conversation marked a turning point, renewing Greg's resolve to face the challenges with courage. He began speaking openly about his family's history during public appearances, acknowledging the mistakes of the past while emphasizing the importance of learning from them. His vulnerability struck a chord with many, transforming criticism into admiration. One particularly powerful moment came during a town hall event, where Greg addressed the topic directly. "My grandfather made choices that hurt people," he said, his voice steady. "And while I can't change what he did, I can choose to use my platform to promote healing and understanding. We are all more than the worst parts of our history, and it's up to us to decide what kind of legacy we want to leave." The audience responded with a standing ovation, and for the first time in months, Greg felt a sense of peace. He wasn't running from the past anymore, he was confronting it, transforming it into a source of strength. For Nia, watching Greg step into his role with such conviction was both inspiring and affirming. She had always believed in his potential, but seeing him embrace his purpose fully reminded her of why they had embarked on this journey in the first place. Their work also began to yield tangible results. Communities that had once been divided by long-standing tensions were finding common ground through dialogue and collaboration. Stories of reconciliation and growth poured in, reinforcing the importance of their mission. One such story came from a woman named Margaret, who attended one of their workshops. She had grown up in a neighborhood where racial divisions were deeply entrenched, and her experiences had left her skeptical of any efforts to bridge those gaps. But after participating in the program, she wrote them a heartfelt letter. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I truly understand the power of empathy," Margaret wrote. "Your initiative has given me hope that we can create a better future, not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come. Thank you for showing us that redemption is possible." The letter brought tears to Nia's eyes, a poignant reminder of the impact their work was having. It also deepened her belief in the power of love, not just romantic love, but the love that fuels compassion, understanding, and the courage to create change. As the months passed, Nia and Greg continued to grow, both as individuals and as partners. Their relationship, once tested to its breaking point, had become a source of unshakable strength. They had learned to lean on each other, to embrace their imperfections, and to find beauty in the journey they were walking together. On the one-year anniversary of their initiative, they hosted a celebration to honor the progress they had made. Standing before a crowd of supporters, Nia and Greg reflected on the lessons they had learned. "Redemption isn't about erasing the past," Nia said, her voice filled with emotion. "It's about facing it with honesty and grace, and using it as a foundation to build something better. We are all capable of transformation, and when we choose to love ourselves, each other, and our communities, that's when real change happens." Greg took her hand, his smile radiating pride. "This journey has taught me that unity isn't just an ideal, it's a practice. It's messy, it's challenging, and it requires us to confront parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. But it's also the most rewarding thing we can do. Together, we can create a legacy of hope, one step at a time." As the crowd erupted in applause, Nia and Greg shared a glance that spoke volumes. They had faced the shadows of the past, weathered the storms of doubt, and emerged stronger for it. Their love, though imperfect, had become a testament to the power of resilience, vulnerability, and unwavering commitment. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of love, redemption, and unity. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today. And don't forget to leave a comment below with this affirmation: "I choose to create a legacy of love and understanding in my life. Together, we can make the world a brighter place." See you in the next video.